Okay, so as promised, here is part two. I did not get to it in a time period that I thought I was going to, but we're here. Unfortunately, we were under a tornado, something or other, tornado weather preparation for a possible tornado. It didn't actually touch down in my area, thank God, but it did south of where we are in several other places. So, by the grace of God, oh my gosh. There was snow in the forecast the next day, off and on, like snow flurries. There was rain, you name it, just whatever. But we're here, so grateful to kind of have gotten through last week. I'm not exactly sure what's going on with the spring weather. We got a little mixture of everything, but that ain't why I'm on here. Anywho, but I'm trying to stay more consistent with coming on here to kind of like just make sure that I am holding myself accountable to complete my goals and accomplish those things that I set out as goals for myself, which is for me is consistency and making sure that I'm posting, and also building this community. So one of the things that where I stopped off at previously, one of the things that we were talking about with this particular organization with capable limitations, and just making sure that we're talking about the experience that many of us have gone through in our diagnoses. And so I realized at some point in time, even as I'm recapping and I'm, just kind of like rehearsing these stories in my mind, and if I get emotional, I get emotional. I started realizing some of the experiences that we all share and that we have had in not being believed, and what the impact that kind of does on your psyche, the impact that does on your heart. Not just because people focus a lot on mental health, as we should, but it's not all mental. Sometimes it's emotional. And I know for me particularly, I can speak from my own experience that one of the things that has happened for me is that there's just been this level of disappointment. There's been a level of disappointment that I have had, because I've always been one of those type of people. I was like this as a child. I was, people may consider it gullible, but I'm not necessarily I didn't consider it gullible. I believed the best. I truly did. I believed the best about people. I thought the best for the most part, in trying to believe that people were who they presented themselves to be. They are who they are. And I think like innately there was something in me that also felt the same thing. Like, okay, like, why is this not, why is this so difficult? And so from those experiences, again, which we'll get into some segments about that a little bit later on, about even how to navigate those things with your family, addressing issues that you've experienced concerning that in employment, those type of things. So this particular doctor, again, we went to go see. So a little bit about my story, just recapping my story. I was 9 years old. I won't forget that. I was 9 years old. My parents took me to a children's hospital in Duke. They took me out of school that day. We drove to Duke in North Carolina. And while we were there at Duke, the doctor was like spot on about certain things that had nothing to do with why we were there. The doctor he was running all these different tests, and he was just fascinated. I remember him just being so floored and fascinated about the fact that I had already started puberty, that I was like, my body was like well in advance into certain stages of puberty. Like I was beyond wearing training bras. I was already wearing bras. Not only was I already wearing bras, I was also, I had just started my period. It was like all those type of things. And so he was just like, wow, like at 9, like, so I get it. He was just like, very fascinated in the sense of like just kind of bewildered about how did that happen. But that wasn't why we were there. So because he didn't have answers for the other portions of the things, the main concerns my parents had, because my parents didn't ask him any questions about me and my puberty, about any of that. They didn't ask me those type of questions. They were just going based off of, the things, because he's a specialist. So while we were there, I remember, like I said, as I was ending it, the doctor was telling my father, well, maybe it's behavioral. Maybe she just needs some, extra encouragement and support in the sense of like, incentives. Put up a chart on the wall, put some stars on there so she can see the days that she's not peeing on herself or she's not peeing in the bed, and that would help like to incentivize her to keep going. And again, to my black parents who are straight up black, you understand, like, black no chaser. My dad was looking like, oh yeah, put some stars up. Oh, okay, they're gonna be stars, all right. And my life, and again, and I say this from a space of, I don't knock my parents. I just got finished eating some very delicious lemon blueberry pancakes. They were mid, but they were still good. It was good enough. The flavors were good. Composition could have been a little bit better, but it was still, so don't mind my tongue. Blueberry. I love a good blueberry. Child, love a good blueberry. That's not why I'm on here. Anywho, but I started to say that from that experience, that was some of my first experiences that I remember that made the biggest impact on me medically, because I remember looking at the doctor like I was shaking my no, that's not it. That's not it. But because I was a child, it was like I wasn't believed. Or it was assumed like I didn't know. I couldn't pinpoint and tell anyone that this is the reason why this is happening. But I knew when he stated that wasn't it. I knew emphatically that ain't it. Like, first of all, I know myself, and secondly, I also know my parents. Like what? I'm not that kind of person trying to get their attention in that way. That ain't it. So, as time progressed, my health condition did not change. I was still peeing on myself. I was still wetting the bed. I'm talking about, this is going up into, at that point, I can say I was 9. This went even up and through like teenage years. This went up and through, going into my adulthood. So I'm gonna tell you where the next experience that was like most major. Again, I was still going to the doctor, having my regular checkups. Nothing changed about that. But when I was turning 18, again, we were still on a military base, and we're at Fort Campbell, and I was like, oh, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. At this point, my dad had got stationed there, so we had moved there. And I remember, man, I've had some really interesting experiences. I had a really good primary care doctor. He was my first primary care doctor. I remember I was terrified, just petrified that he was a good doctor, but he was the one who was assigned to me. He was a male doctor, and it was my first time having a pap smear, and he had to do it. He had like a nurse in there or someone assistant in there, but he was doing my pap smear. I remember I was terrified. I'm thinking, like, all my life I was like, okay, you're supposed to open your legs to nobody. And I was sitting here like, I'm required to open my legs to this man. I don't know him. I don't know this man. So that was just another experience. But I remember that during that time, I was wanting to get on birth control. I was wanting to be a little fast and grown. In preparation, at the time, I wasn't necessarily fully being fast and grown, but I wanted to prepare myself just in case. So I was like, okay, let me get on some birth control. Let me just, see how, just to be on the safe side of things. And because I was like wanting to start dating and all these type of things. And so, just in case I can be on the safe side or whatever. But as many of you may know, when you go take birth control, before they even give you birth control, one of the first steps that they do is they take a pregnancy test. And in the process of them taking the pregnancy test, you do like a urinalysis just to make sure you ain't pregnant. And they had me go in the bathroom, go pee in this cup. And this is the Fort Campbell Army base. They had me go pee in this cup, and then while I was waiting or whatever, they put the stuff in there. While I was waiting for the results, I had to come back. They called me back later in the week, and they were saying like, so I could schedule my appointment for my depot shot to come back like later on. And then after they got my results back, I would come back in there and get my depot shot. So I came back up there to go get my depot shot. But when I came back up to get my depot shot, they were saying that Oh, by the way, we recognized that there was some blood in your urine. And I remember telling her, I was like, I didn't see any blood in there. And she was like, well, it was microscopic. She's like, it was microscopic, but we want to just make sure and see, what's going on. Crazy. That happened when I was like 4 years old, like 3 to 4. But something in my mind triggered that it had happened to me before. Something in my mind triggered that. I was like, It was just really crazy how something was like, you've experienced this before. So, so the doctors at the time were like, there were a couple of doctors who were there. So it was like that my primary doctor, along with my primary care doctor, along with somebody, he was saying like, like we had to call it something and have you see different people. But they were like, we want you to come back. We want you to come back in like another week, and we're just going to do a quick urinalysis just to check, make sure everything's okay. And I was like, okay, cool. So it was like, I want to say that it was like 2 weeks. I had to come back in like 2 weeks, a 2 week time period. Either way, it was like at some point, it started off as a 2 week. It was 2 weeks later. I came back, they checked my urine again. They said that the microscopic levels of blood had increased. So they wanted me to come back in a week. So I came back in a week. So they waited again and made me wait another week. I came back again. It had increased by that third time. By that third time, it had increased enough that when I went to go pee in the bathroom, it was visible and I could see. I was like, oh, there's some blood. So I mean, I actually was able to see it myself. And so I remember at that point, again, of course they seen it, but it was like, they were like, okay, let's go ahead and start getting you. We need to get you over to do some tests. They ran all these different tests. They did these different MRIs. They did these different exams. I mean, and it was like I always want you to understand. This is at 18 going into 19, because I remember it was towards like the ending of that year. I was well into like I wasn't like just freshly 18, but I was like well into like 18 going on 19. And I remember that during this particular time, I was just sitting here like, how did we get here? Like, what? So I was going to the appointments, but I'm like, okay, like, all right. But I was drinking that nasty mess they make you take and all this. It was like at some point from a one visit of trying to go get on birth control turned into this whole fiasco where I was going to the doctors regularly. And, it was so interesting because I remember my old best friend, like I remember seeing his mom there at some point in time, like because again, it went on for years. It was going on for years. So they were trying to figure out what was going on. They were sending back and forth to these different doctors. And so they ended up sending me to a urologist. And I want to say this because, again, I think for anybody who's on here who can experience this, who can relate to this, I know for sure you remember the doctor that took you seriously. I know for sure that you remember the physician or doctors or assistants or even lab techs or x-ray technicians, because that's another story for another time, who not only took you seriously, but who really assisted and helped you in figuring out what in the world is going on, right? So that particular, for me, that doctor, they sent me to several different military doctors. It was, different specialists. And so then they referred out, because on the military base, you have like primary care doctors. They have like certain doctors for certain things. But when you need to go see a specialist, they refer you out. So they referred me out. I went to go see several different doctors or whatever. And then they sent me to Dr. Peterson. This man about saved my life. He didn't save my life in the sense of like, there was a lot that he could do, but not only was he the doctor that he took seriously my conditions, and he researched, he asked questions, he did stuff, he was exploring, let's figure out. But this is also his specialty. He was a urologist, so this is his specialty. So that's another thing I would sit there and say, if there's any particular things that you keep asking questions, but also look to see if you can find a specialist for the conditions that you may be, struggling with. And this particular specialist, I will never forget, because it was my first time in life ever going to get a catheter. And, well, I didn't know I was getting a catheter, because they made sure, they intentionally did not tell me that I was getting a catheter, because I promise you, I would have came to that appointment and they knew. the assistant ended up telling me that later on. So they didn't tell me that I was going to have a catheter. So I'm thinking, like, I always had to go in there, go give a urine sample, I can't tell you how many urine samples I've had in my life, you had to give in my life. I cannot honestly tell you. But when I can't tell you how many catheters at this point. But I went into the office. I remember going in there, and I was, young, everybody in there. I still remember the exact outfit I had on. I had this little, like this kind of like little track jacket that had like, it was like gray, black, and white. And I had like these, I used to wear these big, I know these, but I used to have some big hoops. I had these big hoops in my ear. I'm sitting here like, and everybody walking up in there like 60s, 70s. There was a lady who was clearly, she may have been a little bit older than that, but she was being wheeled in on a stretcher. And I remember people sitting in there. I was the only black person in there. And the couple of ladies who were sitting there looking at me like, what is she doing in here? And I remember during this time, there was a lot going on. I was just sitting here like, I got rights. This is how I'm looking like. I got rights to be here too. Like, clearly I'm a patient. I got rights to be here. But it was like that type of vibe was there from some of the patients. And I was like, so it was already uncomfortable with me having to be there. I'm saying, like, I'm in there with all these different people who are nowhere near in my generation. And I don't look anything like me. So I was already like, I was just like all this anticipatory, like, all this anxiety. I didn't know what I was walking into. And so I remember the assistant came to come get me. And she, as soon as you walked back in the back, I went to the left, and she was like, okay, you can go, there's a bathroom right there. She said, you can go ahead and go use the bathroom. And I was like, you need me pee in a cup or something? She said, no, you're fine. Just go ahead and use the bathroom. And you go ahead and empty your bladder. And I was like, oh, okay. First time experiencing that, because they normally just give me a cup, go pee in the cup and go about your business. Should have known, but I didn't know. So I went and used the bathroom. After I got finished using the bathroom, they took me back into the exam room, and they had me put my legs in the stern. It was like, okay, so we're going to go ahead and just check your bladder. I'm like, it wasn't registering, and nor did anybody tell me. But I'm like, how are you going to check my bladder? How are you going to check my bladder if you just make me go pee? But so she had this thing. I was like, well, I'm like, what you about to do with that? She said, oh, this is a catheter. We're about to go ahead and stick this in. I see the needle. I'm like, I said, no, I what? I was not prepared. I was not prepared. I was screaming. Absolutely was. I was screaming. Again, all these years, there's so many different years this was happening that I don't remember. I can't remember if I was like 19, if I was 20. I know it was in that range of time period of when all this was happening. It was somewhere in that time period, because it was like several years of going back and forth to the doctor. But they gave me my catheter. So when he gave me the catheter, so at the time they were trying to figure out the most important thing, because I was urinating blood. They needed to figure out where was the blood coming from. That's what he was telling me. Their goal was to try to find out where was the blood coming from, because that was like the most urgent thing at this point. Yes, there are issues and problems that need to figure out, why am I still peeing on myself? Why? And it wasn't happening at that point. It wasn't happening all the time, but it was definitely still happening. But it was like, we need to figure out why is this happening? What's going on? But the most urgent thing is, let's figure out, where is this blood coming from? Is it coming from your bladder? Is it coming from your kidney? So you need to figure that out. And so they did your analysis. They pulled out what they call your true urine. They stick the catheter in there so they can get there's still leftover urine in there to kind of just get that, and they test from that. And so when they did that, I remember him scheduling me for several different other appointments, several different other testings. So the next appointment that I came in, they did this sensory test. That appointment was mind-blowing. So they did this sensory test. They stick a catheter in there, and they had like, I'm going to say like two, possibly two. So they had like two different ones. Like they had one that would like fill my bladder and one that would empty. I'm not sure if it was like the same one, or no, it couldn't be the same one, because he was saying that they were going to start filling. Yeah, they had two different ones, and then they had other like sensors in there. So like one would turn my body, like my bladder would respond to cold, like they would like have like a cold sensor, and the other one would be like a heat sensor. So it was like they also like filling my bladder. So they were filling my bladder up with fluid to kind of just see how my bladder responded when it was completely full, how, how much was it, like, how was it emptying, all the different things. And they also wanted to see how my bladder responded with temperature sensitivity. And I will never forget this appointment, because it was during that appointment, because I remember he was like, when they filled up my bladder, he's like, if you have to go use the bathroom, if you have to go, you can go ahead and go, it's going to catch it. I was like, and it felt so weird releasing my muscle, like, to let my body like pee, like I know it would pee. And I wasn't peeing on myself because the thing was in my bladder, like catching it. But what I learned in that appointment was that my body is extremely temperature sensitive, and it made all the sense. It explained all the things I was trying to say from since I was a little girl and a child. First of all, I have no control. I had no control over it. My body is extremely